Hello, amazing person. Welcome to season 2 of Dear Catalyst Coach podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Cooley. My specialty is helping leaders like you go rogue. Each week, I offer a reading and unpack my blog post, sharing additional stories from my life, including how I went rogue. Rebecca's Gone Rogue is one of my favorite ways of being described by one of my previous employers. I'm very proud of my legacy. Plus, I go deep on all things introversion, leadership, career shifts, stress reduction. I'll be answering questions like how do I overcome imposter syndrome? How do I reduce public speaking anxiety? How do I reduce my negative self-talk? So tune in each week and let's go rogue together. Get inspired to take action, to go rogue in your life, to start an inner revolution, and to be the catalyst in your own life. Wishing you lots of peace, joy, and freedom. Hello, wonderful person. Welcome to this week's episode. So I've been thinking a lot about people's worst fears. Fear of being judged, fear of being excluded, fear of being bullied or laughed at, fear of being thought of as stupid, fear of losing their position or resources, and fear of being kicked out of a group. I've ultimately been considering how these fears are not ungrounded. It's not always just a perception or an irrational concern. For some, these fears are a very real threat, one that they have experienced before when interacting with people who engage in exclusive behaviors, or one they experienced as a child when they were bullied by their peers, or fears that they experienced as adults who were shunned by their colleagues. So I think it's just as important to look at the reality of exclusive bullying, ostracizing, shunning behaviors in our culture as it is to look at how our fears and perceptions cloud our views of others. So in this episode, we're going to dive more deeply into the phenomena of exclusion and the reasons why, so that whether we have been or are being excluded or are also excluding others unintentionally, we can understand the greater impact of our actions. When an individual is excluded from a group or a family, it's usually about survival. When an individual or group excludes another, it's usually about survival. So survival of what? Survival of the group, survival of the status quo, survival of the predominant way of thinking, survival of the individual doing the excluding, survival of the individual believing in their own justifications for excluding. So if an individual identifies with a group which excludes, ostracizes, bullies, shuns, or judges, and sees themselves as separate or better than another group, that individual can easily be wedded to their belief that those in the other group deserve to be excluded. That the individuals that are considered the other deserve that disconnection, harsh judgment, exclusion, ostracizing, and shunning. So very reasonable and highly intelligent people succumb to this belief system of self-identification, labeling the other, and engaging in exclusive behaviors and thought patterns that perpetuate a divisive, excluding world. So to understand the why is just to go a bit deeper. And I think there's many reasons for excluding behavior, all rooted in survival and fear. But survival of what exactly and fear of what? To understand why people both exclude and experience exclusion, it's so important to understand the varied roots. For us to truly understand, we must look at ourselves objectively and honestly and acknowledge that not only have we ourselves been excluded, but we've also participated in excluding others, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So when we can courageously acknowledge this, we can make changes for the betterment of ourselves and the people around us. Those who engage in exclusive behaviors function from a fear of being disconnected from the group they identify with. They also function from a fear of rejection and being excluded themselves, not only from the group, but also from the resources that the group provides that are important for their own survival. So in other words, if an individual participates in an exclusive behavior against the other, promoted by the overarching group which they identify with, this can be a way to ensure that they remain in the fold, connected to, and secure within the group, hence survival. If an individual in a group then identifies with, chooses to engage in excluding behaviors against the perceived other, the individual may risk exclusion, ostracization, shunning themselves. If the individual decides to break from the group, or this brave individual decides to no longer identify with an overarching group, or chooses to no longer label the other as other, or decides to no longer participate in exclusive behaviors in word or in action, the individual may risk having resources withheld from them and ultimately may risk their own survival, and this could be literal or figurative. So many individuals throughout history who chose to break free from their groups and discontinue exclusive behaviors risk their lives and the lives of their families to choose a different way. To most, this can be terrifying. So we stay neatly tucked in a culture that perpetuates the concept of other. and we stay safe in our homogenous views that these are our people, but those are not. So this dualistic thinking pervades our culture in so many ways, and we see it in the dichotomy of race, gender, sexual orientation, politics, sports teams, and also in personality types. As a society, we're constantly looking for answers to those big questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? Where do I fit in? Who are my people? We need to belong. It's human nature. We're made for connection. It is not only a part of our survival and our sense of survival, but it's also neurological, biological, and emotional to stay connected as a sense of for our sense of survival, or our feeling that life is worthwhile and deeply satisfying, to have that connection. So from those initial questions, there's more questions. Now that I've identified myself as XYZ, now that I know where I belong, what are the prevalent thoughts and beliefs of my group? How do I continue to ensure that I remain part of this group? What do I need to say, believe, do to ensure my survival in the group? What is considered wrong to believe, say, and do to my group? Who are the enemies of my group? Who is the other? And how does my group think of, talk about, talk to the enemy or the other? So we exclude because we or our group have in fact been hurt by the other, or we perceive that we or our group have been hurt. Either it's a perception or it's a fact. We may believe that we are on the righteous side by hating, excluding, ostracizing individuals of the other group, and most people who exclude believe in their righteousness of their own behavior of exclusion. So another root cause of exclusion is the aspect of aversion. This is when people exclude or turn away from others who they deem to be unattractive, repellent, weak, or wrong. At times, people exclude, ostracize, shun those who are perceived as different. So people who are shy, introverted, quiet, neurodiverse often experience social exclusion based on their behaviors, communication style, mannerisms, inability to read social cues, emotionality, sensitivity. Deeply rooted in survival and fear, exclusion necessitates identification with one group and not the other, and indicates a deeper belief in separateness, also known as duality. So what is this concept of duality versus non-duality, and how does it impact a divisive culture that perpetuates exclusion? Duality is the idea or belief that we are all separate. It focuses on labels and differences. The philosopher Aristotle created a system of classification in use to this day, which aids in distinguishing. And so while distinguishing is helpful, it's a helpful tool across disciplines for learning, it is also at the root of disruptive phenomena like caste systems, racism, classism, sexism, ageism, neurodiverse discrimination, and bigotry. Less severe are the process of distinguishing that divides based on political leaning, sports teams, introversion versus extroversion, truly anything with a dichotomy, a duality. And the underlying mentality is us versus them. Whichever group we see ourselves belonging to versus the group we see the other belonging to, leading to thoughts like, if they are not with us, they're against us, or even to the extreme, they're our enemy. And all my latent anger can be released and expressed in this acceptable way against those on the wrong team or in the wrong political party or who are just wrong. But the belief doesn't stop there. It can pervade every aspect of life and work and culture to include the wrong race, the wrong class. So it's too apparent sometimes a myriad of issues that arise from believing and behaving from a divisive view. Yet we do it anyway. We all do it to some extent. Perhaps we believe at some level just a little duality can't hurt. Or perhaps we're in a denial of our own divisive beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, words, and actions. In this case, our work then is to become more aware and to make deliberate choices to alter our perceptions. A different perspective, which is non-duality, focuses more on commonalities than distinctions. Instead of separateness, it hones in on togetherness. Distinguishing labels are less important than overarching connections, such as thinking of every individual as part of the overall human family and treating and interacting with them as such. The idea of us versus them drops away, and there is a pervasive togetherness. When we look out at the world and the people in it with our new inclusive eyes, we no longer see the differences but the similarities, and we begin to interact with others with humanity and dignity. There is no longer the other, and we begin to live from a deep belief of just like me. This is compassion. Seeing yourself in the shoes of everyone you interact with, seeing yourself in everyone, seeing them in you, knowing how they make mistakes and you make mistakes, knowing that their hopes, dreams, fears are the same as yours. Sometimes we need to step away. And stepping away when we're doing it from a place of compassion and mindful intention doesn't necessarily need to be from a place of exclusion. and unintentional belief systems. So maintaining compassion, even in times when you need to step away from someone permanently or temporarily, not because of some surface level belief that they are the other based on bigotry, discrimination, fear, survival, concern of withdrawal of resources, self-identification, or because they're different, not stepping away because of some preconceived or conditioned views. Stepping away instead because interacting with this person has interrupted your peace of mind. When you interact with this individual, you can no longer remain in a place of non-duality, togetherness, compassion, peacefulness, and kindness. They or their behaviors has bumped you, and you've lost your cool. You've lost your composure. So to step away in these moments mindfully and intentionally is your way of maintaining peace, both within yourself and within the relationship, until your peaceful compassion towards that individual has returned. So at all times when making the decision to step away from anyone, do it with compassion and with the question in mind: does this interaction or this individual disrupt my peace? So perhaps all the interactions with a particular individual interrupt your peace because you have expectations of how they should act or be and what they should say. In these instances, stepping away for longer periods of time or even permanently may be necessary to regain a sense of equanimity, understanding, and compassion for them. Most individuals are ignorant of how their words and actions affect others. They don't always realize that they're disturbing others, and sometimes they have no clue that the reason they are being excluded is because of the discomfort they cause others. If we can continue to give these individuals the benefit of the doubt, we can transform the relationship, offer clarity, and continue to include them. Think of the greater benefit of this individual to be included rather than excluded, to be given the opportunity to learn how their behavior impacts others and continue to be included. Perhaps there's more of a gray area, and in certain occasions, individuals say and do things that do not resonate with you overall, but your overall peace is not disturbed in their presence. In these instances, perhaps having a conversation to express your feelings or concerns is the necessary action to return to the harmony with them. In other instances, perhaps looking deeply about what they say or did that bothered or disturbed you or your peace through self-inquiry and reflection will help you move through your own internal disruption on your own and be able to return to that conversation or that individual and relationship without any kind of interruption. Perhaps the best course of action is a combination of both. Some individuals, however, are intent on hurting people and through their deliberate choices. So these individuals may be excluders and bullies themselves. As we know, the bully and the excluder, the bigot, the racist, the sexist, is functioning from deep held erroneous beliefs and conditioning based on their own fear and need for survival. While their beliefs are not excused and have far-reaching effects on the people they interact with, and sometimes greater humanity, the roots of their beliefs can be understood, as we've talked about. Excluders and bullies are afraid and in survival mode, and it is likely they will experience people continually and at times permanently stepping away from them until they are ready to be brave and face how their exclusive words and behaviors impact their relationships and others. It is everyone's personal journey to know how we impact others. We will all benefit from maintaining the awareness that we all have a deep desire to connect, whether we intentionally or unintentionally hurt others. So my wish for all of us today and always is to always be at home within ourselves, to know that we truly belong, and ultimately to find a group which values inclusiveness, to offer compassion to everyone, including the bullies and the excluders of this world, knowing deeply that they are living from fear and survival, and to hold the belief, just like me, with everyone we interact with. Okay, my friends, let's unpack this week's episode. So this one's a really important topic to me. I've been thinking about this and working on this for quite a while, and just thinking about the different aspects of bullying and exclusion and just wanting to dissect it and truly understand from all perspectives, from those people that have been bullied, excluded, to also the bully themselves, the excluder themselves, and just trying to understand what is it that creates a bully, what makes a bully, what what is the background of that bully, what's the past relating to why that person became who they are and why they're hurting others in those ways. I've just been thinking a lot about it, and especially coming from that place and understanding of compassion, understanding wisdom, so that we can really transform these relationships and really make an impact on folks that are either experiencing bullying or are perpetuating exclusive behaviors in our world. So I think it will make a big impact. So when you're thinking about this topic of bullying and exclusion and just truly getting to that place of understanding, I encourage you to think of it in various ways. So one, you can think of it from the aspect of yourself having been bullied or excluded. And I know all of us have been bullied or excluded at some point in our lives. I haven't met a single person in my entire life who hasn't experienced one of these two experiences, either being bullied or excluded, either as children in their homes, at their workplaces. In some way, this phenomenon of exclusion has touched us or somebody we know and care for deeply. In other instances, we ourselves may have engaged in exclusive bullying behavior, either intentionally or unintentionally. Sometimes when we do it intentionally, it may not be for malevolent reasons. Sometimes we can engage in exclusive behaviors for very benevolent advocating reasons. So as we unpack this, we're just going to discover and learn more about even how a bully who doesn't even see themselves as a bully and sees themselves rather as an advocate and someone that's fighting for justice, and they're doing it in a way that could be aggressive. We're going to learn about that as well. So together, we're on this journey together. So I looked up the word bully. So what is a bully? A bully is one who is cruel, insulting, and threatening or aggressive to others. That's what bullying is. And so a bully is someone that typically will seek out the weak, the smaller, or the vulnerable, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be the case. I think the overarching definition here is a bully is someone who is cruel, insulting, threatening, or aggressive to others. So when we're leaving it in this broad definition, we can see how even someone who is on the advocating side, standing up for justice and standing up for the weak, the vulnerable, or the small, can also themselves engage in exclusive bullying behaviors when they are cruel, insulting, threatening, and aggressive to those they see as a threat, maybe even to those who they see as a bully. So this is where it gets a little bit layered and complicated too. Thinking about how does a bully bully? So if they're cruel, insulting, aggressive, or threatening, they can involve in shaming behaviors where they're shaming others, making other people feel wrong or bad. They can engage in hateful speech, hateful actions, a hateful attitude towards others. Certainly, we've talked about exclusion as something that the bully can do. They can make fun of people, tease people, for various aspects of their personality or their persons. Maybe they are, they're making fun of people that are weaker, smaller, vulnerable, but people involved in exclusive behaviors can also be making fun of people for other reasons besides weakness, smallness, or vulnerability. They can be making fun of people for neurodiversity, for being a different race, for being a different sexual orientation than them, all of those reasons. And bullying, of course, we already know can involve, violence. It can be verbal violence, when someone's cruel, aggressive, or harsh um, in their verbal ways, they can be aggressive or threatening verbally, insulting, and then obviously physical violence as well, are all different types of ways that people can bully. I tend to think that bullies become bullies because of the trauma that they've experienced. Typically thinking about what creates a bully, I don't believe that people are born bullies. I don't believe that the majority of the people that are bullies or excluders are psychopaths. I don't believe, psychopaths being like very small percentage of the folks that we're interacting with in this world. But I do believe that bullies are created, not born. And I believe it has to do with their upbringing. I believe that the people that are bullies in this world and excluders have experienced themselves harsh treatment. They've either been bullied themselves, they've had love withheld from them, from their parents, their teachers, their peers. They've experienced not being heard, listened to, or seen. They've likely been shamed, either shamed for their differences, their weaknesses, their own vulnerability. Maybe they were engaging in neurodiverse behaviors that were not acceptable to their family, peers, or teachers. And in that way, they experienced bullying themselves for being different, maybe not knowing that the certain behaviors that they were expressing were not acceptable to the group. or the family. And I know, like I said, many of us have been bullied or excluded at some time in our lives. I have never met a person who has not been excluded or not experienced bullying. Many people have, I have met people that have not experienced bullying per se, or maybe are too ashamed to say that they have. But I've not really met many people that have not been excluded or have experienced the feeling of not feeling excluded. I was thinking about this painting that my mom had at her home, and it was a painting of three women, um, four women total, three women in the background. They all look the same. And then there was one woman at the forefront of the painting who was different, who just had a different look to her. And I asked my mom about the origins of the painting and why she created that painting, and she expressed that at one time or another, every person in the family felt like they were the one that was separate, the one that was a part of. And not knowing at that time, when I first asked the question when I was younger about the painting, not understanding the backstory and the history of every person's journey in my mother's family who had experienced and what they had experienced, not understanding then, but understanding now, I get how everybody can experience that feeling of exclusion or feeling left out or feeling different than, and how sad that is. Thinking about my own history of experiencing bullying in school. Yeah, it's when I remember distinctly this one particular memory. I was in high school, and I was the weird little girl. I was weird. I was different, and totally own and claim that now. Not so sure I was owning and claiming that at that young age. But I was definitely a philosophical youngster, and I was 14 in homeroom. And I remember telling everybody in the class, the teacher had left for a moment. And I remember we were all talking, and I was expressing that I was a pacifist and that I did not believe in fighting back. So I don't know how we got on that topic, but I was very adamant of my pacifism. And the kids in the class, it wasn't all of them, I'm certain, but it was quite a few of them. I can't remember how many. They kept on asking me, well, what will you do if we surround you and start beating you up? And I said, well, I'm a pacifist, so I'm not going to fight back. So I remember that they all surrounded me and they started kicking and punching me in the classroom. And, the teacher came in, and of course I was excused from the room. But yeah, that was looking back, that memory and remembering that, like that feeling of like just very direct bullying for all sorts of reasons, right? Understanding like what overcame that group of individuals to want to do that or to choose to do that to one person. um was it my beliefs? Was it how I was interacting with them? Was it what was going on in that instance that would create the situation that one person would be beat up in a classroom, essentially bullied in that situation? But that was just one of many examples. I have a history of being bullied in school, and also a history of not being bullied also. But these memories of the harsh things, the sad things, the things where you feel vulnerable and separate from, these things tend to stick with you as well. So there's all sorts of ways that those of us who have been bullied or been excluded, how we deal with these experiences. So, we have the basic understanding of the stress response: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And certainly in these experiences, when we've been bullied or excluded, we can certainly go into flight mode, where we withdraw from groups, withdraw from relationships. We don't engage for fear of being laughed at, hurt physically or verbally or mentally. We can go into that place of just not engaging at all, just completely avoiding those situations. Another response from being bullied or excluded, we could certainly go into that freeze response, where we notice that when we're feeling, maybe we're in front of a crowd or a group and we're about to speak, but we freeze and our words don't come to us. And that could easily be from experiences of being bullied or excluded. being laughed at, being judged, not being understood, heard, or seen. So we can certainly go completely within and not be able to have any expression in those moments where we just completely freeze. And there's also the response of fawn. So fawn, for those of you that don't know, the fawn response is a trauma response that relies on people pleasing. So you can avoid conflict trying to placate a perceived threat. So that people pleasing, and a lot of us engage in that, is a stress response from something that has happened in our past or something that we are avoiding happening and we want to avoid happening again or happening at all. Where we go into that people pleasing mode, that's the fawn mode of stress response. And that can certainly be another way that those of us that have experienced bullying or exclusion or seen it happen to someone close to us, that's our way of avoiding it as well. Another response is the fight response. Fight response is a very interesting response. And in thinking about different ways that people engage in the fight response as a response to being bullied, and even if the bullying happened when they were younger and they're responding to it now in their current relationships, and that includes work relationships as well, people can become bullies themselves as a response to being bullied. Absolutely. And they can also become advocates where they become strong. Um, they strongly speak up for those who they see as weaker or more vulnerable, or in the moments when they are people that are weaker or more vulnerable are being threatened, attacked, or bullied themselves. So advocating is certainly a response to being bullied as well, because that compassion has come through and people want to make sure that other people don't experience the same pain that they experienced when they were younger, when they were bullied. And again, it doesn't have to be when they are younger. People are certainly being bullied in workplaces. Um, it definitely happens. I've seen it. And, being excluded, being talked to harshly and cruelly, these things happen. So advocates can certainly be born from a past response of being bullied themselves. And then another thing that we're going to look at today is the advocates that are themselves bullying and excluders in their own way. So these are the advocates, but the way that they go about it is the way that they advocate for whatever they're advocating for, either the people or the cause, whatever they're advocating for, they're doing it in a way that's very bullying, that's cruel and harsh and hateful. And they also engage in exclusive behavior. So they're still advocates, but they're doing it in a bullying way. And usually these folks are functioning from this belief of self-righteous. They're self-righteous in their attitude. They have very strong self-righteous beliefs that their view is correct, and they can also engage in verbal violence, maybe even physical violence, because they're so certain that their view is right and that what they're standing up for and who they're standing up for um, needs that level of aggressiveness. And I'm not here to say in some instances it's not true, for certain not, but we're just going to be dissecting these different things. So for me, my journey has certainly gone from a bullying advocate at times towards people and situations and behaviors that I deemed to be completely wrong and shameful, to an advocate. I do my best to be an advocate without the bullying any longer. So as a child, I experienced a lot of trauma, and both physical trauma and various types of trauma. And I certainly was inside myself an advocate, and that's where I went. I had my moments with withdrawal, especially in communication, flight, and I had my moments of freeze as well when it came to communication. I also had those times where I was in fight mode, and the way that I fought against the people that I thought were bullying and exclusive was also harsh. So I was at a very young age, when I was in my fight mode, when I was in that advocate mode, when I wasn't in freeze or flight mode, I definitely did engage in harsh, aggressive advocating. for people that I thought were vulnerable and weak, and I was standing up for. And I remember at the time, thinking about the concept of aggression versus assertiveness, aggressiveness versus assertiveness. And at that time, I was still in those early stages of developing my assertiveness, having been shunned, quieted, confined, and experienced all the trauma I did. And every time I tried to advocate in my household, I was certainly met with verbal violence, sometimes physical violence, and other types of violence to quiet me. So being an advocate I guess by nature, that constant quieting really did have an impact on my communication and my communication style. So as I continued to advocate ongoing, I definitely was in the more aggressive early stages of learning how to speak and speak up and use my voice to make changes. I was definitely in that mode of, you're the enemy, you're the threat, and you're just going to get all of it, and I'm going to do it in this harsh, cruel way to tear you down. And we're talking about people that were bullying and also people that were using violence against others. And so that's how it would come out, in a very bullying way. And as time progressed, that aggressiveness tempered as I began to understand more and more about the bully and the reasons why people engage in those sorts of behaviors, and have, transitioned into more of an advocate rather than the bullying advocate. So let's talk a little bit more about the difference between advocating and bullying. So thinking about these questions, is the person advocating in a way that is cruel, insulting, and threatening? Is their voice raised? So I remember when I was a bullying advocate, when something was wrong or someone was treating somebody badly, somebody weak or vulnerable or smaller, or anything that I thought of like as the underdog, I was definitely being insulting. I was definitely having my voice raised and things like that. So when we're thinking about the advocate that is the bully type, is this person advocating in a way that is cruel, insulting, threatening? Is their voice raised? Are they implying that resources will be withdrawn from an individual if they do not change? Is there an air of self-righteousness? So typically, when we are functioning from this place of advocating, there is a level of self-righteousness. And rightfully so. There are just simply things in this world that cannot be stood for, and we're not talking about sports teams or political leanings or anything like that. It's more, when someone is being hurt, when a child is being hurt, when somebody is being violently attacked, things like that, right? There is an air of self-righteousness that is absolutely warranted, and self-righteousness to feel like, yes, this is wrong, and this is what's wrong, and this is what's right. But sometimes when we get into those places, not necessarily when we talk about child abuse or things like that, but that can transfer over into other things like political leanings and people thinking they're right about other things. But that self-righteousness is an interesting thing to carry with oneself. Self-righteousness can certainly devolve into a place of violence, because people use self-righteousness and being on the right side of the view as a reason and a justification to be violent, to be bullying. So if people are engaging in raised voices, cruel, insulting, threatening behaviors, it can definitely fall into the category of advocating, being a bullying advocate. So there are many reasons a person who thinks they are advocating could have a blind spot in their view of themselves and easily miss that they are advocating in a bullying way. So this individual may have grown up being bullied themselves. They have been seen as weak and vulnerable themselves by the people in their lives, and may not have been seen, heard, or listened to. So the person grows up to be an advocate and a person with strong views, and they're convinced that they will not be listened to because of their past experiences. And again, this may not be perception because they did have past experiences where they were not listened to, but that doesn't mean that all people that they interact with where they're speaking up and advocating won't also listen to them. So, but just like with any other skill, they have to crawl before they can walk and walk before they can run. So what does this mean? So when an advocate advocates, when they see an injustice and are ready to speak up, the advocate can advocate in a cruel, harsh, yelling way to those he or she perceives as a threat, or perceives as engaging in threatening behaviors towards those that they're advocating for, perhaps those that they see as weak or vulnerable, that the advocate sees or perceives as weak or vulnerable. Thereby, they're treating those that they're opposing in the moment as threatening, as the threat. So, in other words, there's a projection and a transference happening in this moment based on a triggered trauma that the advocate is experiencing in that moment. And the people that they're yelling at become the people of the advocate's past who didn't listen, didn't see, didn't hear. So, of course, this type of bullying, this bullying advocate behavior will typically be met with a counter or defensive behavior by the people that that person's yelling at or being hateful towards, further reinforcing the bullying advocate's belief that the individual they're yelling at is in fact a threat. And on it goes, completely deteriorating their relationship and solidifying the dichotomy of us versus them. So this is an example of the advocate trying to run before they crawl or walk. They've not done their inner work to understand that to advocate in a harsh, yelling way is actually to create that duality based on self-righteousness. And when they're grouping people in the category of threat without double checking if this is in fact if a fact or perception, and then ultimately what's happening is they're not coming to a place of compassion or the attitude of just like me, which can then temper the harshness to the point where all that duality has chiseled away the ego and pride, and all that's left is a deeper understanding and giving people the benefit of the doubt and trusting that kindness, love, gentleness, peace are the way. Looking deeply and understanding why one becomes an advocate and seeing what triggers us, taking that mindful pause before allowing ourselves, our words or actions to be divisive, harsh, or cruel, and hence bullying themselves, is crawling. It is the walking before the running. We're ready to run after we recognize why we say what we do, why we say what we say and do what we do. Otherwise, we've become the very thing we believe we are advocating against. We become the bully. And I know it's a bigger, deeper conversation to talk about when is advocating in a harsh, cruel way, and in what moments is it okay to do it in that way, in a harsh, cruel way. And I think that we all know when. I think we know when at a deeper level. And I still think there's work to do, even in those moments. So I was recently speaking with one of my friend's children. She has two children, and they're 6 years old. They're adorable. And in the car, as we were going to the movies, they just wanted to talk, and this was great. I got a chance to get to know them pretty well, and they wanted to share about the bully at school, and they wanted to talk about the bully at school. So apparently there was a bully at school, and this particular bully is not nice to people, and they've told the teacher, and whenever they see anything happening or the bully being mean or cruel in any way to anybody else, to any of the other children, or even to themselves, they tell the teacher. And they have their own way of engaging with the bully in those moments where they stand up and say something and tell the teacher. And they also told me that sometimes the bully cries when the bully was creating art, for instance. And the bully said to themselves in front of the other children, "I'm not good at this." And they were self-berating, putting themselves down. And I asked my friend's kiddos, what did they say in those moments? What did they say to the bully in that moment? That they don't usually say anything to the bully. They just let them talk mean to themselves. And I threw it out there with the permission of my friend, just to say this. When you see the bully being mean to themselves, know that the bully is typically mean to themselves inside, like a lot of us are. And that's a clear indicator that things at home probably aren't that great, that somewhere at their home, most likely, someone is being mean to them and saying mean things to them. And that's probably the reason why they're bullying other people. And so in those moments, it's a good opportunity to show the bully kindness and to let the bully know how they can speak to themselves in a kind way, and that even though they are being mean and cruel to other people and other kids at other times, in those moments, you can be kind to the bully and show them what it sounds like, and that not everybody thinks badly of them. They said, the kiddo, my friend's kids also said, that no one talks to the bullies. No one talks to them. Everybody just makes fun of them and stays away from them. And I said, that makes sense. The staying away. I encourage them not to laugh at the bully when they're not engaging in bullying behaviors. Um, but it makes sense to stay away. It's a response that makes sense. I also told them not to bully the bully, not to engage in harsh and cruel things by like making fun of them, because the bully will keep on being a bully if they always experience that kind of response, both at home, likely, and at school, just as best they can, just stay away when the bully's being a bully, advocate and stand up for whoever needs to be stood up for, any of the other children. Let them know, let somebody know, let the teachers know what's happening so that that behavior stops. And in instances when the bully is self-berating or just being themselves, see if they can show them a little kindness. And then we went to the movies and that was fun. End of story. But ultimately, just thinking about me personally, just thinking about what is this person going to be like? What is this bully, the school bully, going to be like when they get into, the work environment, the workplace? And how many people throughout this individual's life are they going to continue to hurt um, because they were hurt, right? Because they were hurt. And I think that's the key when we're thinking about bullies and we're thinking about excluders. And when we've even engaged with bullying advocates, right? Perhaps we've been on the receiving end of a bullying advocate who saw something that we did or said as threatening. And instead of giving the benefit of the doubt or having a calm, compassionate conversation full of kindness and tenderness, perhaps we've been on the receiving end of harsh, cruel words from someone who is stepped into a mode of being triggered by their own trauma. And at some point, the cycle needs to stop. And sometimes I think that that place can be us. We can individually put a stop to it, at least in that moment, by not continuing and perpetuating the cycle of violence that happens when someone is speaking harshly, cruelly, being exclusive, right? How can we completely address this? How can we address this in a complete and thorough way in the moment without perpetuating the cycle that will inevitably continue if we continue it? But how can we stop it in the moment when we're faced with it as individuals? And I know in some instances it's a bigger conversation. In some instances, what do we do? What do we do when it is a bigger thing and we need to use harshness? Can we speak in a way where we're advocating, and do we always feel like we're not going to be heard or listened to? Can we really make an honest assessment of who are we speaking with? And can we connect with their humanity and their dignity and their goodness to be like, you need to stop. This needs to stop. And can we say it, or are there instances where we do need to be harsh? Do we ever really need to be cruel? I'm not sure. But, perhaps even if we need to speak loudly and if we need to be harsh, Can we do it without cruelty? Can we do it with compassion, even to the people that we see as threatening and are being threatening? Just bigger questions to think about, but I think ultimately it just comes back to how can we be compassionate with each other? How can we remember the just like me? How can we understand that even when people are acting in cruel and exclusive ways, having that bigger understanding of this is probably from trauma. And it doesn't excuse it, but it helps us understand and maybe helps us choose a reaction and a response to this individual that can perpetuate peace and not more divisiveness. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks for listening. You've been listening to Dear Catalyst Coach with me, your host, Rebecca Cooley. Thanks for being here. Tune in weekly on Tuesdays for new episodes. Remember to subscribe so you can be the first to know when new episodes are released. A little bit more about me. I've been helping leaders in Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies achieve their career and communication goals for over 15 years, helping them to create catalytic and lasting change for themselves, their employees, their organizations, and their families. Overcoming hurdles of limiting mindsets, anxiety, lack of confidence, fear, and more. I was named top 16 coaches in Raleigh. I graduated with honors with an MPA concentrating in strategic leadership. I hold a BA with a concentration in speech communication, graduating magna cum laude. I am a certified master coach and a certified meditation instructor with over 1,500 hours of stress reduction training. So you're ready for a partner to join you during this revolutionary time in your life? You can reach me at www.catalystactioncoaching.com. I offer private executive coaching and corporate training for teams globally. I'm excited to connect with you, wishing you lots of peace, joy, and freedom.